Hi friends, so today I'm going to be reviewing this book right here. This is The Sweeter the Juice by Shirlee Taylor Hazlip. It is one of my all-time favorite books. I've had it since 1997, so I've lost the cover, but here is the cover. It is a story about two sisters shown right here. One who grew up and represented herself her whole life as white, and one who represented herself as black. The sisters were torn apart by this, and they did not ever come together again until they were at this age, actually. So let's get into this book. I had to put my glasses on because I might be referring to this book often. So the beginning of this book starts telling the story about Judge James Dandridge Halliburton. He was a slave owner who had a wife, and he also had a child with a slave, as was the custom back then, unfortunately. The child that they had together, him and the slave, was Edward Everett Morris. And he was very obviously very light complected, and he was born a slave, but he died free. He married an Irish woman. Her name was Margaret Morris. So therefore, when they had children, their children again were even lighter. The oldest son of Margaret Morris was William Morris, and he had a few siblings, but he also married someone who was of mixed background, and so their children again got even lighter. What ended up happening is that this man had 5 children, 3 which were light enough to pass, and 2 just with a slight brown to them, so much so that if he were to claim those children, it would be known that he was not white. The mother's name was Rosalind Rose Scott Morris, another very light-skinned lady. However, she passed early on, and when she passed away, the father decided, I'm going to go live as white. The older children, the 3 older children, decided, I'm going to go live as white. They left behind the 2 brown-skinned children, which was really, when we say brown skin, it really is relative. So it's just, they just had a little tinge of brown to them, almost enough to give them away. So they basically were discarded. Now, the heroine of the story is Margaret Morris, who was a child of William Morris Sr., the man who decided to go live as white. She was the discarded child. She was discarded along with her brother Michael, who died at a very young age. So she was left alone to be raised by darker family members. As she grew older, her family still wanted nothing to do with her. So she never talked to her father. She never talked to her siblings. She was basically just discarded because she would give it away that they were black. I'm not going to say that I judge anyone for trying to pass as white or for passing as white. Life was very hard back then. So passing as white could afford you a good job, being able to raise your children in a nice area, avoidance of unnecessary bullying and beatings. So if it were me, I don't know what I would do. I don't know if I would pass or not. The moral of the story is not whether it's right or wrong to have passed back then. The moral of the story is that today, none of us really knows if we're white. They assume they know, but if your family has been in this country or in other countries, because slavery was not only in the US of A. For instance, I am Puerto Rican, and I am a descendant of slaves. Puerto Rican people actually had Spaniards land on the island. They took over Puerto Rico, and what was on Puerto Rico was a Taino Indian. Taino Indians were like the Native Americans here. They did what they did. They brought their slaves over. So I am a mixture of Taino Indian, Spaniard, and black. All right, so back to this story. So she was raised alone, always being ashamed of who she was because she was black, and you could tell she was black. Her features, her nose was a little wider, and her hair had a little more curl, but she did have very long, beautiful hair. So this particular child lived a very terrible life of being shuffled between family members, never really having someone who cared about her as far as first family goes. She had an aunt, I'm sorry, a cousin. She had a cousin of her mother's who helped to raise her. And then there was an uncle who did not deny her. He worked as a servant in a very big home. So when he died, he left her all of his property. So he had homes and he had a lot of money saved up because he had been working in this big home and he lived there. So he didn't have to spend money on much throughout his life. He left the money to her, probably would have liked to leave it to the whole family, but because they didn't claim him either because he was Black, they had moved away and had no contact with the family. He left it all to her. And then all of a sudden, they come in and they take all the properties from under Margaret. She was able to keep the money, but the properties were divided amongst the siblings. So that becomes a tale of, okay, so yeah, you went ahead and passed as white. I can't blame you for that. But then you were Black enough to come in and claim this money though. All right, so so this story continues on where Margaret grows up. She marries the darkest man she could possibly find. She raised an amazing family. They were all very educated, grew up to be authors and poets and all of that type of stuff, still being Black, right? So they're a very, very successful family and they're very impressive. Meanwhile, when she had just gotten married to her husband really didn't understand why her family had neglected her. And so he tries to convince her to reach out to them again, which she had been doing all her life, trying to reach out to them. For instance, when her grandmother died, she knew that her family members would come to the funeral. So she was so excited. I think she was a teenager. She was so excited. She wanted to come out and see her family members. She knew they were going to be there. They waited till she left because they did not want to see her. And then as an adult, her husband convinced her to write them a letter. The letter was returned with a note saying, "We do not know this person." So the entirety of her life, she was completely discarded by her family because of the color of her skin. Meanwhile, they're living a white life. They're not telling anyone. They married white people they did not tell. They had white babies, white grandchildren, white great-grandchildren. So when they were in their 70s, Margaret shows up at her white sister's doorstep. They were in their 70s. And, she accepted her. Now her family understands that there is Black in the family. However, they grew up their whole existence not knowing that there was Black in their family. So this story is just a tale that seems to me it never, ever gets old. It's a story that has been probably repeated in thousands upon thousands of families where people have gone on to pretend that they were full white in order to avoid persecution. And so their family members today don't even know that they have Black in them. I will say that passing for white was a very risky thing to do back in those days. You were always on edge, obviously, because you're always afraid of being caught. And the penalty for that would be hanging, beatings, so there might be all kinds of penalties for that. And plus you would lose the life that you had become accustomed to. And your whole family would be destroyed if they were all white. So there was a lot of things to consider when deciding to pass, I believe. And I don't know whether I would have done it or not. It was a very, very big risk. Because you could have married a white lady, you could have been her father and married a white lady and then had a brown child. Or the features or the hair, whatever, would have given it away. Once people decided they were going to be white, a lot of them did not procreate. And that was on purpose because they were not sure what would happen if they had other children. They were afraid to be discovered at the penalty of death. And so this story makes me really sad, not only for the main character in the book, which is Shirlee Taylor Hazlip's mother, Margaret Morris, because she was abandoned, and it really kind of made me angry for her. But then again, I sat and I've had this book so long that I've had time to contemplate the ramifications of either staying black or going white. And I can't say that I could judge either one. I think that it really, really did take an enormous amount of fortitude and strength to stay black during those times, even though you know you could pass. For instance, her Aunt Mamie, Margaret's Aunt Mamie, stayed black even though she was a literal white woman. I have that, a little bit of that in my family, in that my mother-in-law and her sister are very, very light-skinned. So their father was black, but he was a very light-skinned man, and their mother was from Colombia. And so my mother-in-law has a tinge of tan in her skin. However, her sister, Nana, is, if you saw her in the street, you would swear she was a white woman. But they stayed black. They married black men. They lived black lives. They had black children. I do understand that it takes a lot of fortitude to stay black, or it took a lot of fortitude to stay black during those days. But also, I really have to consider what the people who passed, what kind of strength it took to do that, because they always had to live in fear. They were always in secrecy. And if they had been discovered, you know, the penalty for that was high. And it was a secret that they took to their graves. And so, again, this is a story of one family that shows you how many other families there could be out there today that are living as white because they think they're white, while Americans consider a drop of black in you to be black. Yes, even still today. This is not any kind of indication on how I feel about one or the other. This is not some kind of indication of whether I feel you have black in your family or whether you should identify as anything. That's not my place. I'm here to tell a story, and that story is The Sweeter the Juice by Shirlee Taylor Hazlip. Again, I think that this book can be found. I think I've seen it a couple of times, like maybe on eBay, but they're all secondhand books. This is a pretty old book, and I do not see that it is in publication today as a new book, because I tried to find it because I needed the cover. But if you guys get a chance, go ahead and get this book, The Sweeter the Juice by Shirlee Taylor Hazlip. Trust me, you will not regret it. Trust me, it will change your view about how you might be white or you might not. And this book has a lot of really good images inside to help tie the story together. And I am very happy that Shirlee Taylor wrote this book. I looked her up on Facebook, but it seems like she hasn't been on Facebook in a long time, because I just wanted to, you know, talk to her a little bit about her book. She's not been on for a long time. So last I saw her on was 2010. And then the last I saw her husband on, I believe, was about the same time. So I'm not really sure what's happening with the Hazlip family nowadays. But I just wanted to bring attention to her book because it is extremely well written, and it really will take you back to a time, and maybe introduce you to a time, because maybe you don't know this part of history, that you would be very interested in finding out how people were able to maneuver within the white and black lines and the tragedy of it all. All right, guys, that's it for me on this one. And I guess I'll see if there's another book that I'd like to talk about. But this one really is deep in my heart. It's been my favorite book since the 90s. I have read it over and over again. It is a well-worn book. It's highlighted and everything. There's actually, even in this book, look what I've done here. This is their family tree. And so you get to see exactly, you know, for instance, in this image here, I have highlighted those that went on to live a white life in pink, and those that stayed black in gold. And as you can see, there is a large amount of family that chose to go white. So there are a lot of people out there who probably believe that they are pure white today, because as they had children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, they never told anyone. So a very interesting book. So I do suggest that you try to find this on eBay or wherever, The Sweeter the Juice by Shirlee Taylor Hazlip. Thanks, guys.